This week, Adam talks with graphic novelist Rina Ayuyang, author of Blame This on the Boogie and her latest, The Man in the McIntosh Suit. She talks about the new book, her tools, Lynda Barry's influence on her work, and more. But first, we've been getting some new listeners lately, especially through YouTube. We'd really appreciate it if you would tell your friends about our show. Share your favorite episodes on your social media. And you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube by clicking our social media buttons on the sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. Also, tell us what you'd like to hear on the show at mail@deconstructingcomics.com. This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics.
All right, you're listening to the Deconstructing Comics podcast. I am your host, Adam Passion, and I am here with a special guest, Rina Ayuyang. She has been nominated for awards such as the Ignatz and Eisner. Her book, Blame This on the Boogie, came out in 2018 from Drawn and Quarterly, and she's here to talk about her most recent book, The Man in the McIntosh Suit, which just released this May. So, Rina, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me, Adam. Thank you for waking up early.
Yeah,
too.
no problem at all. Yeah, so this book, now I in general, I try to be very objective when I talk about stuff like this, but I don't know if I can with this one because it really touched me in a very like special way. I think you and I have talked maybe before, but this book is about Filipino immigrant stories, and stuff. And my great grandfather came over from Ilocos Norte, like way back in 1920, right around the time of the setting of this book, I think. And so, like that, these kind of migrant worker, day labor stories and stuff is something that's always kind of been in my mind, like, oh, I'd love to do a book about that someday. And so I'm really glad that this exists in the world because I never would have got around to it. And your book has done way better than I ever could have. So I'm really happy that this book is here. Yeah.
Oh, well, Thank you, Adam. And I didn't know that you were from Ilocos Norte. So, and that I knew that you were from here in California, in I think the Bay Area,
from
right?
San Jose, yeah.
And so it's exciting to hear that your family is part of that generation, that wave, and that my family is too, and that they might have maybe connected at some point.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
But speaking of connections, it's been nice hearing that from other Filipinos and Filipino Americans, and just getting really good feedback from this book, and just it's been really nice to hear. It's very it feels very much like a community, So so it's been good. I mean, you can still write that book, though, Adam, because there's a lot more stuff to touch upon.
Yeah.
But with the history of Filipino migrant workers in U.S. and a lot of stuff that hasn't been uncovered. So always like looking for stories about our community.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so that's something I did want to talk to you about maybe later in the discussion, but just that idea, like, You begin the book with them kind of talking about Filipino exclusion and stuff like that, like as it's almost a preface, and then it doesn't really come back in the story. Like, that's something I really liked about this book is you created kind of this safe space almost for the Filipino community, like this bubble where it's in the background, but it's their everyday life is kind of more consuming their attention, right? Until they just happen to like get caught up in conversation and wander outside of these Filipino zones. And then it brings it all back. You're like, oh, wait, they're not welcomed here. It was a hostile environment for them, and even in California and stuff. So that's something where I thought, like, when I first saw that this was going to be an immigrant story about Filipino, migrant workers and stuff, I thought that would be more about that stuff, and it would have been very easy to make that kind of a story, I think, like where it was focusing on how hard life was, but instead you told it in a way that could only be done by you. It was like this much more it involves like these kind of like classic Hollywood tropes and all this other kind of stuff, and it becomes this more almost fantastical kind of story. And so yeah, I agree. There's definitely more space for those migrant stories, but like this was told in a way that only Rina Ayuyang could have told the story. So yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
wow, thanks. Um, yeah, no, I came into it really just like naively just thinking I'm going to make a detective comic. I've always wanted to make one. And I already had Bobot the character like as this established detective. He was a well-known detective in the San Francisco community, and he was hired to solve cases. And um, when and this was like early on, like in 2010, when I thought of this idea, and when I brought it up again, just I guess 10 years later. Um, I started, and it was going to be like later, like in the 50s or like 40s, 50s. And I knew, like, I think when I started thinking about writing it, I knew that I needed to talk about the history of Filipino Americans, because it was something that still needed to be kind of taught and shared their experience. And it's not something that is really taught in
Hmm.
schools. It's outside of an ethnic studies department. And I really thought like it initially was just going to be like Bobo in like a bubble world where it's like just sort of this sitcom
Yeah.
episodic thing. And and he happened to be in San Francisco, but he could have been anywhere really. But I felt the need to talk about the social and political situation they were in and how that affected a lot of their decision making and a lot of like their life
Hmm.
choices, and that added so much layer to the story. And um so it could have been just like this very easy like detective romance thing, and which I love, but also I knew that I couldn't tell the story without talking about that history that was totally surrounding
Sure,
them.
sure.
um
Yeah, but you told that
yeah.
history like it wasn't like you didn't put like these big Chris Claremont kind of like explanation boxes and stuff. Like you told it in a very natural way.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's a part of the character's life, and you didn't kind of hammer it over, to the reader's head. It was like this really subtle way of putting it in there. So yeah, I
Right.
think that was really cool.
And I mean, and I feel also that that's sort of how we kind of live our lives in the world, like especially, marginalized people, where, we try to live our lives as normal as
Hmm.
possible. And, and it is normal until you cross certain things or you encounter certain hostilities. Um, and those are jarring when it happens. And, I think anyone that has experienced, those encounters of kind of racist
Hmm.
encounters or discriminatory encounters can feel that. And I wanted to show that in the story that, we're all just trying to live normal, simple lives, trying to survive, really. And that certain outside forces, suddenly just like
Yeah.
come upon us in very like jarring
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Actually, so that the fact that when you mentioned that, that actually kind of brings up the title itself, because, um, and I have to confess, I wasn't totally aware of the cultural significance of what a McIntosh suit was to the Filipino community until after I read your book, and I kind of went and did some research. But it does seem
Okay.
like that McIntosh suit was all about like trying to, I don't know, find a sense of like, even though they were poor and, living paycheck to paycheck or whatnot, like they wanted to always look their best, and almost in this kind of an attempt to get
Mhm.
into American culture, I felt like, I mean, like mainstream American culture or something. So
Yeah.
could you talk a little bit about just the McIntosh suit kind of phenomenon or?
Yeah. Yeah, so the Macintosh suit is there was actually a tailor company called the Macintosh Tailor Company. I think that was no specifically named that, but he created custom like bespoke suits, and a lot of his his patrons were Filipino men during the time during the 20s and 30s. And it was based in San Francisco, around where kind of close to Manila town, like on Sutter Street. And so yeah, the whole concept that there's a history of, I mean, Filipino men are just so dapper in general. Like, you have your lolos or your dads, and they're always like, I remember when my dad went to work. He worked for the VA for like decades, and he'd always wear like this really nice suit, like he was a banker or something. But and he was just, and I'd go visit him, and everyone else would just be wearing like polo shirts or jeans and stuff. And so like is this like style that goes on among Filipinos, I think. And but specifically for like the McIntosh suit in this time, I feel like it was like the one way that Filipino men had a sense of ownership, that they were able to save up for these suits and be able to customize them in the way they wanted. And it was just made specifically for them and their body and their measurements. And then there's a lot of like symbolism with Filipino and Western culture. I mean, we were taken over by the Spanish, and then the United States, and we are so influenced by Western culture. And so everything with the movies, like American movies, and my parents were raised by American movies in the Philippines. Like they always went to the movie theater. So Western culture is like something that we, Filipinos aspire to be. And so like, I mean, even just anybody, it's like Hollywood is sort of an aspirational thing. And so there's all these symbolisms of glamour and sophistication and, being a civilized person. And so the suit conjures up aspirations of being someone that they want to be, they hope to be. So hopes and dreams, and like the American dream. And that even though they are these migrant workers and farm workers that live in these small huts on the farm, that they could at least have control over how they presented themselves outside of their working, their dance halls and everything else. So, and then the suit, and just in the story in general, also talks about like kind of like gender roles in a way, like who, when you put on a McIntosh suit, who do you become, and like what's your identity through the suit. So I really wanted to play around with that.
Yeah.
The suit itself in different ways in the story.
Sure. Like I mean, I definitely see that. Like I feel like Bobo, like when he takes his friend Angel's suit first, right, and puts it on. There's instantly like a confidence to him that he doesn't have. I mean, he always seems like a confident character, but I think like there's more of a machismo kind of thing going on once he has that, and he keeps it plays into the story so much because he keeps going back to this tailor. Like, I need this suit because if I don't have it, I can't get to the next, goal.
Right.
And so, I think that it definitely plays into that. And, it's such a cool concept. Like at first I was like, oh, it's kind of like a zoot suit, which was kind of a similar like time frame, like the Chicano community, but because it's their identity, but it's more than that, I think, because the zoot suits were almost like a gang thing or like a power thing, maybe for Chicano culture. Yeah. Whereas this to me seems more like there's a certain sadness to it for me, because it does feel like they're trying to fit into a society that will never accept them. And there's comments in the story even, where he's like, when I save up my money, I'm going to get a big house and bring my family out. And they're like, who's going to sell you a house, whether you get the money or not, And so that was something that I thought was really powerful, is that like they're sold this dream that they will come out to America and make all this money and stuff. But it's the reality of it is so different. Right. So that I guess that was the heartbreaking thing for me. Like there's a character who says, I studied political science and I had this dream that I would become a diplomat. And it's like, it's, there's so many Filipinos like that. I mean, my great grandfather was the exact same way. He had like golden gloves, like boxing in Philippines, and he thought he was going to be this great boxer, and he came out and he couldn't beat like a high schooler when he got to America. And so he had, it's like, everybody has these fantasies about what America is supposed to be. And then when they get there, it's just such a, disappointment, I think. So.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, also it's like my dad, he was a law student and he passed the bar right before he came to America. And he came like the fourth wave in the 70s, and he never, became a real bona fide lawyer in America. He worked in insurance. He actually had to like travel from Pittsburgh to New Jersey a lot for work, and he landed in the army somehow. And so, it definitely wasn't something that he expected it to be. I mean, he also was like sort of a Mr. Mom for a lot of years because my mom was working in a hospital at nights. So yeah, it is definitely a lot of expectations were like dashed, or definitely had to change or adapt in very, very intense ways.
Sure. And I think that was part of like, I guess maybe your dad might have been right before that, but I think like part of like the whole Marcos economic plan was like our chief export will be labor. Like that's what it became, right? And so now wherever I go, for business, I'll travel to like Saudi Arabia, and all the engineers there are Filipinos, or here in Japan, all the nurses are Filipinos. And it's like they're highly skilled, highly trained workers that go out and will do the jobs for cheaper than the local people will do them for, and so it's,
or they have to go outside of their of where they live in order to find jobs and to use that money to buy whatever in the Philippines. And so it's and like with the whole thing with like balik and bayan.
I was just going to ask you if your family. I was just going to ask if you send balik bayan back to the Philippines or not. So, yeah.
Balik bayan box is a term for a cardboard box used to send or carry items back home to the Philippines from abroad. There are freight forwarding companies that have special rates for balik bayan boxes.
We do. I mean, we do. Like when my dad was alive, he was in charge of measuring the balik and doing the whole tying up and everything. And but my mom would always like save. Like my mom likes to save a lot. I don't want to call her a hoarder or anything, but she's like every other Filipino family, we save all our clothes and hand-me-downs, and it's like, all the time we're like thinking like, Mom, you could just donate that to Goodwill. She's like, no, we're going to put that away because we know that we might need to send that I can buy a box. I'm like, but I don't think anyone needs a sweater or a blazer
That's
over
true.
there.
Yeah.
No. She is from the sun. But yeah, I mean, we did it a lot. We always would do it for like, especially Christmas time. We don't. I think my mom still does actually. Yeah. I just realized that. But we still do that. Send like the duck ham, the coffee, the instant coffee, towels, all sorts of things. And,
I actually I sent that book that you did some comics for a book that I edited way back when, the Filipino anthology. It was a cool.
Thank you for having me. By the way,
my pleasure. Thank you for joining that. There were some bookstores that wanted to carry it there in the Philippines, and so I was looking at sending books over there, and it was really expensive to send books by a book rate. And someone was like, just put it in a balik bayan. I was like, I could, yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I did. I sent like 2 full crates of boxes by balik bayan because those are like basically tax free, right? Or at least they don't really check them. I think they just kind of pass through. So
yeah, I don't know if they check them or not, but I just know that they're way cheaper in shipping rates than doing it normal way. But yeah, that's a smart move.
Yeah, it worked out well. So
so with the with the candy, with the chocolate, the Kit
Yeah, yeah.
Kats, and
Yeah, you just send a whole bunch of
yeah,
books and then just on the top sprinkle some candy and coffee and stuff, and then they'll never know the difference.
yeah, yeah, some spam. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's awesome.
So, yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about the artwork as well because you have such a unique style, and I think that this one it's a little bit different from what you've done in previous books. I think first of all,
Hmm.
just you have a lot of it is in kind of a monotone, right? It's in the blue. Well, I guess it switches between
Hmm.
things, but it's basically kind of in one monotone, and then that will switch when they go to like dreams or memories and stuff.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I thought it was really cool, and whether this was intentional or not, that like memories, especially Bobot's memories, were in this vivid color, and then when it goes back to regular life, it's back in black and white. Was that an intentional
Hmm.
kind of choice?
Yeah, totally. And thank you for catching that too. Yeah, I wanted to do like a simpler color palette than I normally do. Like Blame This on the Boogie was supposed to be like a Technicolor musical, so I used all the colors of the
Yeah, it
rainbow
was like
for
a
that
Baz
book.
Luhrmann kind of
And
thing.
yeah, yeah, just too much. Um, and For this one, I just wanted to be more strategic. Um, but also, when I first initially started the idea of it, I was going to use color pencil and Copic marker. So so with Copic markers, they're so
Hmm.
expensive, and so I wanted to like, okay, I'm only gonna have to cut these set colors of like, and, and so they were like around five different shades
Hmm.
of blue, and when Bobot meets or thinks about the past or thinks about his wife or thinks that he sees his wife, I wanted to use these really bright pinks and magentas to show kind of like his emotional state when
Hmm.
seeing her and thinking about her. And the blues, I wanted to kind of, I chose that color so that I wanted it to be close to black
Hmm.
and white but still be um, um, a nice cool color, and also to have that same kind of filtered luminescent uh, feeling of 1930s film
Sure.
noir, and also to conjure up that mysterious foggy San Francisco feeling. So and with I used Procreate instead of Copic markers. Along the way, I started to get really comfortable with Procreate, and for a long time, I rejected it just because I just didn't know how to use it the way I wanted
Hmm.
it to. And I chose these two brushes in Procreate, and one is a still use it is this the oil pastel brush and the Derwent brush, and I just liked the feel and the look of that, the texture that it created, um, the filtered
Yeah.
look of it. So yeah, the colors were very deliberate. I wanted the Watsonville scenes to be this sort of sepia and earthy color. So of course the green, I wanted to show the bright greenness of California
Hmm.
fields, how they're very inviting and very lush and scenic, and that's what I love about California is how bright and colorful and vibrant it is, but also it's inviting, but also when you get closer, it is this scene of just workers farming in toiling, and so it's not as this wonderful kind of vacation um, easy
Yeah.
breezy feeling of
Yeah. Yeah.
California.
For sure.
So that those colors and mixing it with kind of this the green and the orange, and that's kind of clashy, and I wanted it to be a little bit not just not as warm and inviting as it
Yeah.
would be. So yeah, I was deliberate in various
Okay.
places.
Yeah,
Um,
it sets the different scenes apart, like the different areas and stuff. And then also
mhm,
one technique that you use, which is it's very subtle but so cool, is like when he wakes up from a dream, there's still like a haze or like a
mhm.
cloud of pink around him, so that's still kind of
Yes.
lingering, and it's such a really understated and cool effect because, it shows the transition from the dream into, like, in a way that I think cinema and things couldn't, So it's a very uniquely comics kind of, comics kind of language there. So it's very cool.
Cool. Yeah, I'm glad you caught that. That was, I mean, it wasn't like, oh, I hope someone gets this. But it was just like, I love how that caught your eye, and it was definitely, I wanted to make sure that people knew that he was dreaming this moment.
Yeah, it's a very cool effect.
Coming up, historical photo reference, digital versus paper comics creation, Lynda Barry's influence on Rina's work, and more. But first, a reminder to join us for 20th Century TV and Music Trivia Quiz videos and more on our Patreon page. Every month, patrons donating $4 a month or more also get a full-length podcast episode reviewing an issue of The Amazing Spider-Man from the 1960s. Check out all our rewards at patreon.com/deconcomics. If you'd rather give a one-time donation, you can do so via PayPal by sending it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We appreciate your support.
Do you like comics?
The 1960s?
How about middle-aged gay couples gossiping about their neighbors? Then you'll love Checkered Past.
A loving examination of DC's Go-Go Check branded comic magazines published from February 1966 to August 1967.
I'm Dr. Bob.
And I'm Dr. Husband.
And each week we'll be your hosts on a trippy tour through mid-century four-color madness. Checkered Past. Available wherever fine podcasts are downloaded for free.
You mentioned, kind of capturing that San Francisco hazy kind of foggy kind of feeling and stuff. So I did want to ask you about that. Like, there's a few things there that immediately, as a person from the Bay Area, caught, like, I recognized, like, oh, that's the Embarcadero, and like Watsonville too, I guess, because I'm from the South Bay. But like a few things like that where I was like, oh, that immediately people from the area would know what that is. Did you use a lot of reference? Like, did you go down there and look at it, or were you looking at photos or anything when you were doing those kind of things?
Well, there was the library, the SF library, public library, has this huge digital photo archives, which is amazing. And so they had a bunch of photos from that time period, which was very helpful because you want to make sure that you're having an accurate representation of the skyline, accurate representation of the ferry building. Like, the ferry building that time had this long bridge that was cutting across from the ferry building to like Market Street, which was just kind of and it was not like, it wasn't as close to the street as it is today. It's like this whole huge yard that was in front of it with all these train cars. So yeah, I wanted to make sure it was accurate in that the skyline, because I do a couple of like sky view type of panels, that like which buildings were there at the time. I mean, I remember I did the cover and I put in the beginning, I put Coit Tower in the cover, and like Coit Tower was not there yet. So I'm like, we need to get that out of there. So yeah, I wanted to like be as accurate as possible, and so it was just very cool to be able to get access to that. And I really, in doing this book, I just really appreciate so many of the like documentarians and archivists and librarians and historians that have made sure to have an archive of that. Because it was like 100 years ago now. And so that is a very far away time. And even though it's like, we think it's like, oh, it's the 1920s and it's still of this century, but it's not. So yeah, that was great to have that as a resource for sure.
I think, and I've always said to other people, like, and especially somebody like you who loves cinema and stuff like that, like, in the world of Hollywood, like, you have a set designer, you have a, costume, like, designer, you have a casting agent, and all of in comics you're all of those people. So like, you have to make sure that these people are wearing time appropriate clothes, and that the buildings are time appropriate, and the cars on the street are time appropriate and stuff. So yeah, I've been down that road. I did a book, a history, like a documentary kind of book called Fight the Power, which was about like protest movements, and so it jumped around in time a lot. And so I was like doing all this research, like, what did Boston police officers wear in like 1910, and like So
Yeah, I know. It's hard to really Google that
right.
stuff. It's like,
And in the end, who really cares, right? Like, is somebody going to look and be like, Boston
right.
cops never wore those bobby hats, you know?
You never know, but
Yeah.
you would know. But no, um, but yeah, you just have to do your best. And I remember, yeah, with the suit, I know that there are moments where I'm just don't get it particularly accurate to a 1920s suit sometimes. But I mean, you kind of, I mean, you could
Mhm.
go either way, like but because I'm just so drawn to like a 1930s suit, I don't know,
Mhm.
but um. But yeah, also like just knowing like the different cars of that
Yeah.
period, because there were still it was like, 1929, so it's between, some more of the modern models of the
Yeah.
time, but still you have to also think of like who are these characters and would they have
Right.
those,
Right.
those models, would they have like a car from like, 10
Right.
years ago,
Yeah.
so making those decisions
Def-
too play into it a
Definitely,
lot.
definitely. It's really cool to like talk to a cartoonist who actually is aware of those things. Like, I think the readers never really think about that, but like, you know,
I don't know. Yeah, I always feel like, oh no, everybody's like looking at every single panel and judging each one. And so I try to do the best I can. I mean, of course, you don't, if you're not from there of that time, I mean, you're not going to know definitely everything that went on. Like, what did they eat?
sure.
Like, what are they, so, but you just have to try your
Yeah, yeah.
best.
It's
Sure.
like that. You've probably seen that meme where they're like, "What people imagine America in the '80s was like," and it's like all these neon posters and stuff. Like what it was actually like, and it's like 1970s like wood panel walls and stuff. And it's like, yeah, we
Yeah.
weren't like we didn't have all that latest stuff in our rooms and stuff. We had all the old stuff from the '70s, right? So yeah.
Right. Great. Great.
So yeah. So I'm really curious about your tools. So you said that you did this a lot in Procreate, and I can't tell at
Hmm.
all. Honestly, I was going to ask you about it. I have it
Oh,
right in front
that's
of me.
good.
So like I was like, oh, this looks like it was done. I was going to guess Copic actually, to be honest. But yeah, did you do the entire book in Procreate, or did you switch partway through, or did you? It was all Procreate.
No, it was all Procreate. The lettering is Procreate. So yeah, those two brushes that I use. The Derwent brush is supposed to be color pencil, a substitute for real colored pencils, and the pastel brush was at first, yeah, I was going to use Copic marker, so it was going to have this marker look with just like streaks of different
Mm-hmm.
blues and stuff. And I had some early like studies and like on Instagram and you can kind of tell how that would look. And so there's like a lot of bleeding that goes on too with
Mm-hmm.
marker. So I wanted to play around with that. So this brush is different in that it's dry, it's like kind of like a dry pastel as opposed to a more fluid look. Like not very like water based, not water based at all. So it's more chalky and it's more, but through Procreate it's totally different on how you use pastel, like a real pastel, because on Procreate everything feels very easy to like, it flows very easily when you use a
Yeah.
pencil. With pastels that does not happen. So so the whole feel of doing that it's a totally
Mm-hmm.
different tool, but it tries to create that same effect. But and I actually did try, said let me just try to see if like one last chance to see if I could use the pastel, because one of the reasons I didn't want to use it was it's just it
Mm-hmm.
goes everywhere, and I didn't the scanning would have been a chore. And so I did try it with pastel, and it's a total different way to use something. They're totally different, two different ways
Right.
of using something. So and just the way that the Procreate pastel brush actually blends more than an actual pastel would, unless you use your hands or like one of those pastel rubbing
Mm-hmm.
tools. It's just an easier way of getting that that same
Yeah.
look with less fuss, I guess. And also, I was on a deadline too, so like just making it as efficient as possible, and so Procreate helped
Sure.
that. but like the next couple of books that I want to do for the series might be a little bit different, but it's still going to be, I think, on Procreate, but I think I'm going to use some other brushes, like more water-based type of, or marker-based. But we'll see. That might change.
So you're locked into digital probably, but you might be playing with different kind of things digital.
Yeah, I feel like I'm gonna move ahead with digital, but there's like things with digital that, basically you don't have like an original art page. So that's the one drawback to digital. I mean, you can always do like a nice fine print, or you could try to recreate this with pencil or anything like that. But so that's the drawback with that. But I don't know. It feels a little bit more efficient to how I do things, because my process is so chaotic, and I feel like it's not efficient at all. Like, I use up so much paper. When I make a mistake, I just like throw it away. It's a very impulsive, intense process. So I think with Procreate, it makes me like, it kind of grounds me a little bit more. It's like organized, and so we'll see. I mean, you never know. I like to change things up.
Sure.
But it's probably best to stay in Procreate, because you want them all to have the similar style, at least if you're doing a series.
Right. So are these, Blame This on the Boogie and Man in the McIntosh Suit, are they, I mean, stylistically, I feel like there's a lot of things that are common. Are you considering this to be part of the same series, those two books, and then further ones going on, or?
Do you think they're common? I think they're totally different.
Well, I guess the only reason I say that is because I feel like there's like I said it before, I think there's a certain Rina style that kind of goes through both of them. You're right. I mean, thematically, they're entirely different.
I like to know what the Rina style is, because I don't know what the Rina style is.
Well,
myself.
I think, first of all, definitely like a very conscious attention to color is one thing for sure. Like using color as a storytelling device, and also like just the mark making. Like, there's definitely a lot of color, and I think there's also like a very immediate kind of style to it. So like that's something that I thought was really cool about like your backgrounds and stuff. Like, I recognized it as Embarcadero and stuff like that, but at the same time, there is such a loose and airy kind of feel to it at the same time. Yeah. So so it never feels stiff. And like, I mean, the fact that you didn't have any, I don't think you had panel borders in either book, right? You definitely didn't in this one.
Yeah, no, I mean, in Boogie, maybe I had one or two, but
mostly not, right?
Totally. That overall, most of my style is panelless. No panels. Okay, now I see that. Where I'm more like a sketchbook, gestural, kind of more spontaneous type of drawing, and but I think maybe thematically they're connected in that, like, there's an homage to American Musical, and with Boba, it's McIntosh, it's an homage to film noir. So there's this whole homage to American cinema or classic Hollywood. Even though Boogie is totally autobio, I think that's why I see it as a very different book. And McIntosh is just this totally different. Like, they just feel like two different properties.
Yeah, I totally see that. I also think though that like there is, like you said, Boogie is totally autobio, but also because it's so stylized, it doesn't necessarily feel like, it feels like you're going more for a genuine feeling than like a genuine like telling exactly what happened. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I feel that same way for this one. Like, it is noir. You have like the femme fatale and the shady mob boss and all this other the detective and stuff. But at the same time, it is very stylized, and it's not necessarily autobio, but it does have kind of your own roots connected in there. So I guess when I say this Rina style, it's almost like a hodgepodge. Like you're not committing to it being a straight detective story or a straight autobiography story, but you're putting in all of your influences in kind of into this kind of stew. So,
yeah.
So,
and also I think just the artwork is not what your typical detective comic is like. I love Alex Toth and I love Mort Meskin and Darwin Cook is maybe that's the closest is the Darwin Cook the Parker series is probably closest in artwork, but those totally inspire me when I think of detective or I think of noir in comics. But I totally do not draw like that. I mean, I'm inspired to draw like that, and I fall in love when I fall in love when I read and look at those pages that they do. But I know that is not my style of doing things, and I think with McIntosh, I bring that kind of painterly gestural style from the sketchbook doodle world that I come from into this genre, I guess, of more like stylized and so I think that's the cool part that I think people are liking about it. It's just a different interpretation of noir in comics.
Yeah,
especially.
definitely. I think you nailed it right there. Like it's noir is obviously very stylized with like the way they shoot it, the cinematography and the angles and the shadows and stuff. But the idea of noir, when you think about it, is a very, I don't know, I guess I think of it being kind of a more somber kind of thing. And you have a lot of brightness to it that you've added. So, as far as your own style, now I promise this isn't just like the Filipino connection, but like I do feel like there's a Lynda Barry thing there. Is she an influence for you?
Mm-hmm. Well, she definitely is in kind of the gestural, painterly, almost like abstract feeling of like just the kind of the freeness of comics. And I mean, there are like I know that we all follow rules in comics, but there is that feeling that there are no rules when you read our particular comics, but we do follow certain. I mean, I'm sure Lynda does. I mean, but I don't know. I mean, who knows? I mean, there are some rules I probably follow, but a lot of them I don't. But definitely her storytelling has inspired me. Like talking about like a lot of like symbolism is huge in her storytelling. Talking about like focusing on characters, like character studies is something I love of Lynda Barry's, and setting up a story, just like a lot of exposition in it, but then it leads into some like kind of this jarring, very earth-shattering, moving event at the end of her stories that I love, and so I mean. I don't try to be like specifically like her, but I do feel like I have some influences from her, and just in terms of like again like freeness and just being able to tell stories I want to tell. Like I feel like it's a very cathartic thing for both of us. And even with this story that's not so personal, but there are some personal elements like mostly based on people like relatives or just like. Certain personalities that I taken from different people I know, but also just reading the history. I had a point to this. I knew it was coming, but what was I don't know what I was going to say with this point. I had something with Lynda Barry, but it was just basically like just the characters that I love, like with Lynda Barry. The way that she tells a story and the way that she just creates these magnificent characters. Again, telling the story that we want to tell.
I think,
but telling it in a way that's accessible and it's universal.
Sure.
I
think that it's interesting that you say it that way, because my initial thought was that you had sort of a like the art work seemed somewhat influenced by her. But hearing you say that, it does seem like even the storytelling is influenced by her. Like it's not, it's more that you're focused on what you want to say and not necessarily making sure that it's like, that it fits the, I'm telling this type of story, so it has to fit these certain beats or whatever.
Yeah.
So I definitely see that now that you say that. So, Well, I mean, I guess I didn't actually talk much about the plot of this book, but I think that's something that the users, the readers can figure out for themselves. So
Yes.
go buy the book. I highly recommend it. If you want to read something that combines Filipino migrant stories with this kind of detective film noir kind of thing, you can only find it here. It's a very unique reading experience. So So thank you so much for your time, Rina. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. I had a really great time talking about the book with you. I had a really anytime.
All right. So, Rina's book, The Man in the McIntosh Suit, is available from Drawn and Quarterly and sold wherever fine books are sold. And I'll talk to you later, Rina.
Okay, thanks, Adam.
It's DCP In Touch, where we hear from our listeners. This time, a couple of comments via our YouTube listeners. Boxcar Hobo writes, "You guys' coverage on Kirby is leaps and bounds my favorite on The Man. Your personalities are dry and truly company well spent. Kirby and the Deconstruction Dudes make for a dynamic duo. Thanks, my dudes." And Terzoid says, "Love the podcast. One of my favorites was the review of George Wylesol's book 2120. What a book. I really enjoy the way that you break down the concepts and psychology of every part of the comics in Deconstructing Comics, and conversely emphasize the art and writing in critiquing comics. Always a great listen, and thank you for helping generate an even more deeper interest in the comic books we all love so much. Keep up the great work." Thanks, Hobo and Terzoid. We're glad to have you on board. Aside from leaving YouTube comments, listeners can also drop us a line or submit your own comics work at mail@deconstructingcomics.com. You can help the Deconstructing Comics family of podcasts by joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics. And go to deconstructingcomics.com to connect to us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, to shop on Amazon to support the show, and to find links to subscribe to the podcast. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. Next week on Deconstructing Comics, Coombe talks to Emily Carrington, author of Our Little Secret, a memoir about her being sexually assaulted by an adult when she was a teen. On Goodreads, Sam Quixote wrote of Our Little Secret, "It's unquestionably a powerful and disturbing story, but accessible, because Carrington is such a skillful cartoonist who draws beautifully and tells her story well, with a great deal of color and thought." Emily will be here to talk about the book next week. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.